Hello, and welcome to the Perfect Franchise Podcast.
I'm Kris, and joining me is my wonderful co-host, Andrea.
In this podcast, we're on a mission to help you discover all that franchising has to offer.
We'll explore expert strategies, interview successful franchise owners, and give you the tools to make informed decisions.
So whether you're considering your options or you're ready to take that plunge, we're here to support you every step of the way.
So let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to another Perfect Franchise Podcast. New year, 2025, but same old Andrea and Kris. So Andrea, welcome back.
Thank you.
And today we have Focal Point franchisee, Len Bruskiewitz. Super excited to talk to Len about what it's like to go through the process of finding a franchise, buying a franchise, starting a franchise. So Len, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. I really appreciate being invited. I'm excited to be here.
These are always some of my favorite, Len, bringing back clients that have made it through the perfect franchise process to ask you some of these questions. And so, Len, kind of start us out. Give us, why did you leave corporate America? Why did you explore business ownership?
Yeah. So I had a long career in high tech, many years with some really successful companies. And the vast majority of those companies serve small businesses as their customer. So just for example, I was at Intuit, Constant Contact, Grasshopper, all who really target the small business and serve the small business customer. And I decided that I wanted the challenge of living that rather than just being on the sideline. So that to me was the impetus for me to go out and say, I think I want to do something on my own.
That's great.
So Len, when you say, you know what, I think I want to do something on my own, did you immediately think franchise, or how did you come to at least include franchising in your search, and what ultimately led you down the franchising path?
Yeah, it wasn't a clear path at all. I think I frustrated the Perfect Franchise folks because I was really on three paths at once. I was still thinking maybe corporate's the way, that's what I know. I'm going to go back to corporate. I thought about starting something on my own, right? Kind of from scratch. And then I was familiar with the franchise concept. So I thought, hey, that could be an option as well. So it was frustrating because, you need to be focused, right? You can't try and be doing three things at once. But where I finally came to that franchising was a good option for me is just basically time to market. I really decided that I wanted some structure to start from rather than building everything from scratch. And I had an idea about what I wanted to do, but I knew that if I did it on my own, it would take me a long time just to get ready. So that's why I kind of ended up honing in on franchises as an option.
So tell us a little bit about the process. What was your experience as you worked through the TPF process? So that was one path you were going down. So help
Hmm.
everybody understand what that looks like.
Yeah. So, one of the things that was early on was, you know, kind of doing some personality communication style testing just to get a sense for, how I communicate with people, what my style is. And from there, it was just this opportunity to experience a number of different franchise concepts. And what I really appreciated about the process was the ability to look at a number of different kinds of businesses. And look, to be honest with you, there were a couple of them I'm like, there's no way this is going to work for me, right? Um, but I'm so glad I did it. And this comes to a little bit of advice I have, which is go through them, even if you think the business isn't all that exciting. Because what happened with me is I learned different things about each concept. And I was able to piece those together to then figure out what I really wanted to do. So, you know, maybe it was the way training worked that I was like, wow, I can't stand that business, but I love the way they do training. So then when I got to my pros and cons list, I was able to say, I wanted the training to be like this, right? I want these other pieces to line up. So that's what I was really thankful for in the process is that I was able to, see these different concepts and never felt uh, I always felt like I was the center of attention. rather than the franchisor. So that made me feel good. It was like, this is your decision. You do what's right for you. It never felt like a sales pitch.
Yeah. Len, you touched on such an important subject there because you know, I tell my clients all the time that in my ideal world, for their process, for them to get their quote unquote money's worth out of the process, I'd love for them to be talking to multiple brands. And what those brands will have in common is that they all check the essential boxes, whatever those like must haves, that's what the brands have in common. But beyond that, the brands would be very different because that's how you learn. And that's what you're saying. That's how you learn what's out there, what your options are, and what you like. Because you didn't like this business, but you loved how they did training. So you know you want a franchise with that kind of training. And then you didn't like that business, but you loved how they did such and such for ongoing support. And so you kind of put this puzzle together. And you can only do that by talking to brands. I tell people, like, listen, it can't be Kris pontificating on Zoom with a bunch of slides. Like, you got to belly up to these franchisors and get a real world education. And eventually down the road, you're in that position to make an educated decision, but you have to be exposed to these things. So
Exactly,
that's
exactly
awesome.
right. And I think that's what happened with me is that, at first I think I was pushing back. I'm like, look, I'm not gonna be felling trees in people's backyards, but I learned something, and not to denigrate that industry, it wasn't for me, but I definitely learned some things about that business that, again, I was able to leverage to create what worked for me.
That's great. Yeah, I agree with Kris. Having people look at least a couple brands gives you that kind of honing in on what you really want. And so, obviously, Len, you landed with something that we would bucket under business services, right? So, Focal Point. Why don't you tell people a little bit about Focal Point and then just what it is and why did you pick business services?
Sure. So I went through a process several years before making the decision, and looked at another business services concept and liked some pieces of it, but decided at that point it wasn't a good fit for me, and I went back to corporate. The key piece to me, if you go back to my corporate career, is that I work with small businesses. And so business services to me was a great fit because I would be working with the same kinds of companies that I idolized and had a huge amount of passion for. And one of the other things, I grew up in a small business. So I kind of knew what it meant to run one. And then again, I had worked with them for 30 years. So it was a relatively easy jump for me to say that's where I want to spend my time. The reason I chose Focal Point uh, as opposed to others was a couple things. I talked about earlier about how I didn't want to start from scratch, and going with Focal Point solved a couple problems. They'd already written the content for the people that I was going to be, coaching. So that was a huge leg up. They had a brand that had recognition, which was valuable to me. But I got to say, the biggest thing for me as for why I chose them versus others was when I made phone calls to the existing coaches, and this may be off the reservation here, but I called people that they didn't recommend as well. I just looked up some existing coaches. So look, I want to get my own viewpoint. And what I heard was, smart people willing to help. And that to me was a huge game breaker. And that's continued to be true. I can call any coach and they are willing to help fellow coaches out. So that to me was the kicker. Just the existing folks were excited about the concept and super helpful.
How long have you been a Focal Point franchisee? How deep are you into
Uh,
the business?
I completed training, completed certification about a year and a half ago.
Okay, so a year and a half in. Talk to us about not the last year and a half, but like the first few months, because that's always kind of a big splash in the face with cold water. We get all excited about doing something new and different, and then the real world goes, "Oh, you just did that decision you made that you fretted over. That was the easy part. Now you got to get to work, right?" So tell us what that was like for you, and is there any takeaways that you could pass along to anybody else that is thinking about starting a franchise?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first months was a series of different training events, right? There was, how to coach, how to find clients, practicing communication, tons of different things, right? So that was the fire hose drinking part, as you called it, or the water in the face. Um, so a lot of that early period was just training, and then the other part was, kind of reconnecting with my network, telling them what I was doing. That was a good part of it, which was helpful. And then there were the other kind of nuts and bolts parts, getting the corporate structure, setting it set up, getting the right tools in place to run my business. But really, the biggest piece of it was just getting through training, and the challenge is that you've got a lot of training in a condensed period of time, and you're doing um, during that training, you're practicing, but you're practicing in a sterile environment. You're not in the real world. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is when you go from role playing to real time, to real prospects or real customers. Uh, that was a bit of a eye opener, because it's the role playing people typically are going to play along with you, and it's like, it's not really realistic. So taking that training, because you've absorbed a ton, and then figuring out how to dole it out and use it most effectively was a lot of the first few months.
So what challenges have you faced? So you're a year in. So tell us, what are the challenges and what does it look like a year and a half later?
Yeah, so it looks a lot better than it did then. uh,
Yeah.
I think the biggest change for me is you had to absorb a lot, and some of it was valuable, some of it some of you use every day, some you don't, and you just have to be okay with that. I think the biggest change for me a year and a half in is I've learned to focus, right? I've chosen a specific area to focus on, a specific client type, an ideal client type, and I've learned to prioritize. So I think part of the other challenge early on is you get all these ideas and you want to try all of them, right? So I think what I've learned is you can't do that, right? You can't sprinkle a little bit here and there. You have to take a couple calculated bets, and set a plan in place, work those, just determine whether they are good or bad, and then move on. So that's what I think the biggest learning is a year and a half in is, yeah, got to focus, got to prioritize, because nobody else, different than corporate, nobody's telling you what to do, right? Every day for me is I can choose how I'm going to use my hours, and figuring out what the most important pieces are is definitely what I've learned over time.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I think all of us talk about at TPF, I know I do, is business services in general as a category for franchising is the category that will require the most amount of sales skill and sales effort from the franchisees, right? And that's one of the hardest things to determine a match on. It's hard for us as consultants, it's hard for the brands because the brands can say, "Hey, you got to be able to sell to do this franchise." And the candidate says, "Yeah, I can sell." And you don't know what that means, right? So can you paint a picture for us, like what's that really take for you? Uh, is it hardcore cold calling? Is it networking? What kind of sales is it for you at Focal Point? And and did you have a sales background? And how important would that be to have success in a business services franchise? If you can talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. I think what is universal in the business services category, more specifically in the coaching category, is that I will never spend a dime on Google Ads, right? That is not the way I am going to find clients. Coaching, business services more generally, is a know, like, and trust business, not a know, N-O, a K-N-O-W, right? In order for somebody to become a client, they have to know who I am. They have to like me marginally, which is a struggle for me, and they have to trust me, most importantly, right? They're sharing everything about their company with me, their financials, their goals, their dreams. Um, so they've got to trust me. And so that typically isn't what happens when you're, putting ads on Google. Uh, so to me, it's a very different style. To me, what works is networking, um, referrals from people that I already know. That was what I spent a lot of time, and has been the most effective for me. And it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I've reached out to the people I worked with over my corporate career. Do I expect any of them to become clients? Absolutely not. But what about the people they know, their friends, their families? That's where I've gotten the majority of my prospects is from people who already know me, marginally like me, and trust me, uh, because they see what I do as a great need, and they're willing to refer me. So that is the prospecting part. The sales part, I've been in done partnerships most of my career. So working with other companies to promote my company's product to their customers. So was it sales? Absolutely. But it was very consultative, wasn't pounding on the table saying sign this deal. So there were a lot of similarities. The difference is in a lot of those companies, people were reaching out to me to work with us as opposed to the other way around. So, you know, I don't cold calling again, kind of like Google Ads, not really where I'm focused. But there are times when you just have to have a lot of conversations with people to get to the right ones. So, and I get that you know ultimately you've got to be able to sell yourself and the vision of what you can bring to a client.
Yeah, because that business development piece is huge. And we always tell people you have to be able to fill the top of sales funnel. It depends on the type of business services. Some of them are true traditional cold calling. This is a little bit, but it's more of a networking calling, right? And you're trying to generate those leads based on that. And so, you talked about that a little bit where you've reached out to friends, family, previous coworkers in order to bring your clients in. What else has sort of contributed to your overall success as a business owner?
Well, from a prospecting perspective, doing podcasts has been something that's worked for me. Uh, but more generally, I think what's helped me be successful, I mentioned it earlier, I grew up in a family business. I watched my parents run a business and learned from them the highs and lows, right? So I had, 18 years at home of living that. And then working with so many thousands of small businesses during my corporate career. I did a lot of training, a lot of coaching in my roles. So I've lived it. Um, and what I think I've been able to do really successfully, based on both my personal experience and corporate experience, is figure out those things within a business that are universal, I'll say. You know, they're pretty much the same in every company, and figuring out how to turn those into a process, right? Make those easy, repeatable. And then at the same time, understanding that there are pieces of every business that are absolutely unique and dealing with those separately. So I think that's the best way I can describe it is I use that corporate knowledge, which is automate, turn into process, simplify, uh, and take those learnings and then combine them with this is a business, they're unique as a snowflake, deal with that part as well.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, we learned one thing today, didn't we, Andrea? And that is Len joined us so he could get some clients. That's why he's
Yes,
here.
we did. We learned that.
Right?
Okay. We're okay with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But on that topic, before the podcast, we were talking. You've actually started to zero in on a very particular specialization with business owners and some franchisees. It's a topic that Andrea and I get asked about all the time. So you may actually get some clients because you're starting to specialize in something that's really important for any small starting business owner. It's important for probably everybody we put into business. Why don't you talk about that? Because I think it's very apropos.
Yeah. So what I focus on very specifically is exit planning, which is helping a business owner get themselves importantly, and their business ready to transition out of on their terms and on their timeline, right? So understandably, the rules around transferring a franchise are different based on, the rules the franchisor sets. But other than that, the process is pretty similar. And it really boils down to a couple things, right? Transitioning out of a business typically takes 3+ years. And I'll tell you why it takes that long. Um, there are certain tax advantage situations you can set up. You can't set those up today and implement them tomorrow. They need a gestation period. So for tax planning purposes, some things take a long time. If you have, and I hope nobody listening to this has any accounting issues, but if you have accounting issues in your business, you need to get those fixed, right? And then it's the other really important thing is getting kind of separation from your business. A lot of business owners become the business, and if that's the case, it's really hard to sell that because you're not you're not selling yourself, you're selling a business. So getting it set up so that somebody else can run it. And again, franchisees are advantage here because there are typically processes and things that are set up. But that's a super important part to having your business ready. And what I'll say is um, every business should have an exit plan, even from the day they buy it, because if you know how you want the business to end up, it's easy to work your way back to how to get there. So that's why I say exit planning is business planning, but there are really some important things to do upfront and then along the way to have it ready. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. I mean, because we hear a lot of people say, okay, what happens if I want to get out of this? I want to go, retire in Florida, or I want to just sell it and buy something different. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach the strategy, whether it's you want the money, you want to sell it, you want to pass it down as a legacy. There's so many ways to sort of exit. And so that's things that all of our clients are thinking in their minds as they come into this. And so even though it's a 10-year contract, do you have to wait till that 10-year? No, not always. And so it's really about sort of just planning of what does that look like and planning out what does my next 5, 10 years look like and where do I want to be with this business?
Exactly. You said it perfectly. That the worst thing that can happen is you wait too long and you wake up one morning and God forbid something bad happens, right? We talk about 5 Ds, right? Death, disability, divorce, disagreements, distress, right? One of those things happen and you haven't planned, then you're in a world of hurt, right? But if you've at least thought about that in advance, then and if you're ready, then you can wake up tomorrow and say, you know what? I do want to move to Florida. I'm done with this. Now at least you're
Yeah.
ready, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
We
great.
should probably have you on again and do a whole podcast just on exit planning.
I know,
But
I,
right?
right?
I'd be
Yeah.
happy to. I have some ideas on the things you need to be thinking about today, the kind of stages. I'd be happy to do that, but
All right.
not right now.
Sounds
Excellent.
great. Yeah.
Andrew, you want to take us home with a couple of rapid fire questions?
Yeah. So, Len, think of this as just being part of that process and move forward, not necessarily as a focal point franchisee, but just let us know what's one thing you would give advice to somebody who's contemplating even becoming a franchisee?
Be open-minded. I mean, I've hinted at it earlier. Really learn everything you can from every concept you speak with. And also just be really clear that there are pros and cons to being a franchisee. There are some really great things, and then some things that aren't so great, right? If you want to make your own rules, that may not be right for you. So really be open-minded and learn as much as you can with every interaction with your team and with the concepts that you talk to. Um, that to me is a huge bit of advice that if you go in thinking I'm only going to do one thing, uh, that's just not the right way to start the whole process.
That's great. And so, one more. What's one thing you would tell somebody in their first year of being a new franchisee?
Be patient and curious. So, not to sound like a Ted Lasso quote, but there are two components I think about. Patience is things take time. Like you think it's going to happen right away, and it a lot of times it doesn't, right? So, the patience part is, I talked about it earlier. You have to try a set number of things and let them prove out either that they're effective or not. Have guidelines, right? So have some parameters around that of I'm going to try this for 3 months and see how it goes, and time bound it, success bound it, right? So that's the patient part. Let things play out. And then be curious is the other side to it, which is if things aren't working out, be open to trying new things. One of the biggest words of advice I have is talk to people outside of your industry. You think it's crazy to say, "Hey, I'm a business coach. Why should I be talking to somebody who's doing accounting?" Well, you just pick things up. You may just learn something that is really important and helps your own business, although that wasn't the intention. So the being curious, I think, is a really important part. Also, learn from the other people in your space. Good thing to do as well. So that was two. I cheated. It was
That's
patient and
okay. No, I
curious.
like that. And I think the last point that you hit on is really huge. And people don't think about that when they think about a franchise. They think they're going to they're buying sort of the systems, the processes, but then they're on their own. We always tell them, no, you not only have the brand, the franchisor as a support, but you have all these network of people. They're doing the same thing you're doing. Leverage them. And your curiosity point just hits on those, right? So ask a lot of questions, see what other people are doing, and then figure out if that's going to work for you and improve your business. Well, Len, thank you so much for coming on today. And like Kris said, we think we're going to want you back on. I think it's a really good topic to maybe narrow in on that again. So we really appreciate having you on, year and a half into Focal Point. Congrats on that. We're really happy for you. So we appreciate it. So if you're thinking about franchising, remember there's no one size fits all to franchising, but there's certainly a perfect franchise out there for you. To explore your options, visit theperfectfranchise.com by clicking on Let's Talk to schedule a call with one of the consultants on the Perfect Franchise team. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next episode. Until then, take care.